Okay, hi Ole. We've already sort of spoken. We've done the formalities, so it's a little awkward and to
Good to see you
to do
officially
it
now.
all over again. But yeah, great to see you.
Hmm?
We met in northern Denmark uh,
Tisted, to be accurate.
at the European Men's Gathering,
Yes.
and we had a chat. And I found out that you're a professor at the Copenhagen Business School,
Yes.
right? And I don't know too much about what your research is involved in. I was looking a little bit. Apparently, you research money,
Yes.
um, and what is money? You asked this question, what is money? So I'm kind of interested in that.
Hmm?
Um, but also, we spoke about men's groups and their importance, and you talked about a business you were going to create um, with our friend Paul.
Yeah.
Related to bringing men's groups into companies and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, maybe you just want to say something about yourself, a little bit. What's your vision? What's your story?
I think you covered a lot of it, or some of it at least. It is true that I've been working on money for the last 7, 8 years. And to some extent, I still am working on money. So I'm not an economist. I'm a sociologist slash philosopher. So that allows me to I've sort of stepped into this field of economics through the back door, which has allowed me to sort of open up very basic questions, which the field itself hasn't really asked, or at least not to a large degree. And one of these questions is exactly what is money, and more importantly, where does money come from? So that's something I've been engaged with. But then in recent years, or the last 1 or 2 years, I've become very interested in men's work, which is why we've met.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that interests me both from a personal point of view, because I am a man. So, and I like being a man. And I think there's a lot of potential in being a man. I think sometimes we tend to think of both men and women, or at least, I don't like the word gender, but I'm going to use it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes we think of gender as a liability, something. It's better if we don't have a gender, and it's better if our gender doesn't really count in the relations we enter into. And I think that's wrong. I don't think gender should be a liability. I think it should be an asset. For me, it's a large asset, and it's something that I don't think we are utilizing enough in our society, in our culture. And certainly it's also something that I found that the more I can utilize that asset in my own life, the better. The better for me, the better for my wife, the better for my kids, the better for my friends, and everything. So that's and that's what men's work is about for me. And
Okay, so masculinity as an asset is what I'm hearing you saying. I have a kind of theory I want to just put forward, which I think is related. Okay, there's a Zen phrase that says, first there are mountains and rivers, and then there are no mountains and rivers anymore, and then mountains and rivers are mountains and rivers again. Have you heard that before? The Zen phrase?
I think I've heard it, but I don't think I understood it when I heard
So
it the first time.
one way to look at this is mountains and rivers is masculine and the masculine and the feminine, right?
Yeah.
And there is a sense that in our society we've kind of lost that, and that's the part where mountains and rivers are not mountains and rivers again, right? And then it seems to be at this point in our history, or in this point in society, there seems to be an interest again in discovering this distinction between men and women, and why that's important, and why it's not just something to throw away, or
That is very true. That is very true. And but I would add that I think, because I also think about this philosophically, I think I've kind of figured out that one of the reasons why I don't like the word gender is because gender starts, as soon as you start talking about gender, you're invited to think about the distinctions or the differences between men and women. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that there are plenty of differences. However, I'm not sure that the question of what is the difference between men and women is the best question to ask. So I like to ask more, what does it mean to be a man? Mm-hmm. And could also be, what does it mean to be a woman? I don't know too much about that because I am a man. So I'm more interested in what does it mean to be a man? Mm-hmm. And it's not the same question. I'm also, this is something that I've become very aware of in my work on money. The thing is, when we approach the question of money, we sometimes, or in economics, there's a tendency to ask the wrong questions about money. So we tend to ask questions about what is the price of this, or what are the relative prices between this and that, and why is this more valuable than this, and so forth. But the basic questions of money, such as where does money come from, tends to get lost in that. And it's the same in the field of men and women. I think when we start talking about what are the differences between men and women, we sort of get sidetracked in a way. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think these other questions, like, so what is it? What does it mean to be a man? It sort of puts us on another path. And that's not, having said that, I mean, again, there are differences between men and women, but I think if we approach the question from another angle, we get to a different point.
Yeah, oh, that's interesting. Well, obviously we define ourselves through difference in some kind of a way. I mean, you know, we're a man. We're not, even the word woman has the word man inside of it. So there's, you know, I think there is a difference, but maybe what you're saying is that it's a more deeper question is when you look at it in yourself, or does that make sense?
Well, it is. I'm not. You said something. So you said that we identify ourselves through differences. Mm-hmm. And I know, I mean, that's the sociology that I've been brought up with, that this sort of thinking in differences all the time. I'm not sure that's necessarily true. Huh. How is it? I mean, what if I just identify as a man, period. Mm-hmm. And then regardless of, and some of the things, I mean, there's some of the things in me that come out when I identify as man, which are probably the same in women. And then there's some that aren't, but still it matters to me that I am a man.
Okay.
So the way I've tried to work with it, I can show you this. Not that it's important, but it's just here on my. This is one of my favorite books. This is Heidegger.
Right. I was going to bring Heidegger up because I know that you're a big fan of Heidegger, and
I love
Heidegger
also.
So.
So Heidegger. So this book, Sign on Sight, is in this book. Heidegger he talks about man, or not man in the sense of man woman, but in the sense of human being. But he doesn't use the word human being. He uses the word Dasein. So which is kind of like it's a genderless being in a sense, right? But he talks about what does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to be Dasein? So, and one of the things that he says is that Dasein, the human being, is distinguished by through the fact that our being is an issue for us. So for me as a Dasein, my own being is an issue for me. So it's my own being is something that I kind of have to come to terms with. I have to investigate it and understand it, but I also have to realize it and live it. So
within time, right? Within time and the fact of mortality and
exactly, yeah. So what I want to try and do, or what I'm trying to do in my work at the moment, is to say, what does that look like if we use these Heidegger's concepts to understand what it means to be a man? What would that look like? And so one of the things I've come up with is that I think what distinguishes a man is that he has to come to terms with what it means to be a man.
Yeah.
So that's basically what defines, or what distinguishes me as a man is that, I have to come to terms with that. And of course we can then do that in many different ways, but we can't get around this question. We just, you need to figure out what kind of a man do I want to be? That's like our life task in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can try and escape this life task. You can stay a boy for your entire life. That's not a good strategy, or at least I don't think that's a good strategy. You can also try to say, no, I don't want that. I don't even want to identify as a man. I want
Mm-hmm.
to, I can be any gender or whatever.
It can be androgynous or.
Yeah, something like that. And on the one hand, you can say, well, maybe that's one way then of being a man, is to be whatever, something. But I think that sometimes there can also be an element of trying to escape yourself in that,
Mm-hmm.
like because
why is that? Can I interrupt? Why is that question so sort of offensive to people, right? At this time, it's like people want to. When you ask this question, what it means to be a man, and then people are almost offended by that, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like it seems to be, no, I'm a person.
Yeah.
Why do I have to be? Why do I have to distinguish myself as a man, right?
I think that it's because we have
excuse me, I'm a little sick.
Yeah. No, if we have a deep sense that, so being a person, for instance, is not it doesn't really come with very many commitments or obligations. It's being a person is something you are. The minute you're born, you are a person. You don't have to do anything to be a person. It's free in a sense.
So being a man is something we need to become, right? It's not something that just happens to us.
Exactly. Yeah. Being a man has this duality. On the one hand, yes, it is something, you're born with a penis and then at some point you become a man. But at the same time, we have this sense that, no, it's also an ethical obligation. Yeah. So there's something, you need to fulfill something, you need to do something. And of course, that can be like, shit, can I do that? And what's going it's terrifying in a way, or it's anxiety provoking, because it may come with all these obligations and responsibilities and all these and also the possibility of failure. You can't, as a person, you can't really fail. I mean, it's not like, oh, then I'm not a person, but as a man, you can fail.
Well, you could be subhuman. You could be less than human.
But would you be less than human? You wouldn't be less than human by virtue of something you do yourself. Isn't it something you become by virtue of something that someone else does to you? I don't know if that's, and of course, I mean, it's also, I mean, of course you can be a good person.
No, that's just semantic. I'm following what you're saying, and I agree. It has something to do also with what you were saying before about becoming, right? In this Heideggerian sense, like.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think it is true that people get offended, but I think below this offense, below this, and anger also, I think below that feeling, there's another feeling, which is a feeling of anxiety, or a feeling of, oh, maybe I can't do this, or maybe I'm not good enough, or maybe I can't live up to this. So I think behind all these feelings that come out, that do come out when you say some of these things, or sometimes come out when you say some of these things, there are actually other kinds of feeling. And I think we should take these, I mean, I certainly think that we should take these feelings seriously. I mean, because they are serious. And of course,
maybe,
I mean, yeah.
No, go ahead.
I just want to add, of course, I mean, when I say that there's a being or becoming a man is kind of like an ethical obligation. That's not to say that there's a specific formula of the kind of man that you then have to become. I mean, there's plenty of ways to be a man, of course. So in that sense, there's an openness in that, but still it is sort of a life challenge, or something, life task you have to take upon yourself.
I was thinking as you were speaking, Nietzsche, he talks about how a philosopher's ideas are really their biography in some kind of a way, right? So then I wanted to ask you about why that's of interest to you. right? Why this becoming a man is of interest to you, and why do you feel this need to let's say become a man, or why do we? Because I can relate to that as well.
Yeah, I think everyone. I think all men and boys, certainly, they also have that, and especially when they start becoming that. I have two sons, they're 12 and 16, so they're right at that age where they feel that urge or that calling to become men, so they're kind of working on that. So we have that, but it's also true, as you said, or I think there's also reasons why someone like myself or you, or we all have reasons for why we then become perhaps extra interested in this. And so for me, I think at least one of the things, I've some years ago I was divorced, and my oldest son, he was like, had a conflict with his mother, and so what happened there was that my role as a father sort of became, was challenged. So I was, so there was challenges there, and also some kind of a crisis there. So, and I think, so that's been part of it, that this has made me aware of,
So the crisis, that's interesting, huh? It's also think that discovering or growing into manhood is always related to at least some kind of a crisis. And in the beginning, that used to be dealt with through rites of passage and that kind of thing. But today we don't have the same kind of formal rites of passage. So often we go through a crisis. And that sort of makes us think that it's important for us to be men rather than be just like our wives or just like other people, or there's some kind of distinction in that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And I can also, for me, actually, I want to add, I just 2 weeks ago, I went on a rite of passage with my son, my oldest son.
All right, with Arne.
With Arne Rubinstein, that you also are familiar with, I guess. And it was amazing. Amazing for 3 days, and for him and for me and for our relation, it was just it's one of the best things I've done in my life. Really amazing. And it's true, as you say, that we need to, what rites of passages, what they do is that they mark sort of transitions in our lives, and the most important transition is the one from being a boy to becoming a young man. But there's also other, and I think for me, I went from being a man to becoming a father. And in that process, there was a crisis and all these and for me, that became a rite of passage also.
Yeah.
A really huge struggle. So for me, becoming a father was not just something, it was something that I discovered that this is something I also have to work on or work for and struggle for. So I've done a lot of work on that. And as I was doing it, of course, with these things, it was like, it's hard work, and it's even more hard work if you have, even if you don't have a conflict with the mother, it's hard work still. But then if you then also have a conflict with the mother, it's even more hard work. So I've done a lot of very hard work, but I've also learned a lot of things from that. And one of the things I've learned is the value of, is how men, how we can help each other. If it hadn't been for other men who helped me, I don't know what I would have been crazy, I'm sure. So I really also discovered the value of friendship and also,
it seems like that male friendship is something extremely valuable. And I also think that it's something that is kind of mocked in popular culture. It's kind of made fun of. It's kind of, it's not seen as a serious and beautiful business, right? It's often seen as a, caricatured as a bunch of, dumbass dads going to the football game or drinking beer and being kind of dragged around.
And I think
their wives or something like that. So I've also, I completely agree with you. I think that I think that this is something I've discovered late in life, is the value of, and the importance, and sometimes the difficulty, but also the beauty of male friendships.
Mm. No, that's true. I've had throughout my life, I've had many close friendships, and most of the time I've actually always had like one or a few very, very close friends. So this is something that I've always valued, but I think as I grow older, I just come to value it even more. Mm-hmm. And then you say that in our culture, there's I think there's a suspicion, or I think because because friendships are so powerful, the things that men can do together, when they get together, they can do really, really powerful things. Oh. And I think in our culture and in society, our society knows that. So it kind of knows, well, if we want to control the population, or if we want to control society, let's not have too many friendships. Let's not have too many male friendships.
Right, because that power can be positive or negative, right? It can be, yes, it can be a terrorist group, or it can be a band of brothers working together to make something great, or it could be all kinds of things, right?
And also maybe, even also just, you can say, well, some of the energy that men would put into friendships, if they don't have friendships, maybe they will put it into their work instead, and maybe that's better for the corporation or whatever. So they kind of want us to expend that energy into that system rather than for other purposes. Mm-hmm. I don't know, that's the conspiracy theory about friendships, but I think that just like I said in the beginning, for me, being a man, it's such a powerful asset which we're not utilizing optimally. And that also includes friendships. Friendships are also such powerful relations assets, which we could also utilize much, much better. That's one of the things I got out of this rite of passage. So I was doing this rite of passage together with, so there was my son and 7 other boys and 7 other fathers, and then there was some assistants who were all men. And this experience of having all these men helping each other raise these boys was just so beautiful and so powerful. And there's so much potential in that we could utilize.
It's almost a rediscovery of who we are as human beings, right? Because that always existed,
Yeah.
And it seems in modernity, it's just been sort of destroyed or turned into pathological forms of itself, or.
Yeah, or many of these things, they've become institutionalized, right?
That also, yeah.
Like, so the male friendship has become institutionalized in the corporation. Childcare has been institutionalized in the daycare facility, and so forth. And of course, some of these institutions, yes, they're very efficient. Institutionalized daycare is very efficient. The corporation, very, very efficient. However, something, when we move our human relations into these institutions, we also lose something. And I think that's kind of where we are today. We're kind of in the process of discovering some of the things that we've lost in that transition, and
because the institutions are failing us on some massive level. Not in keeping the society together, but in terms of providing a meaningful existence.
Yes, no, that's true. So but I also see a lot of good efforts to recreate in new forms some of these things that we've kind of lost. Like the thing that where we met at the European Men's Gathering is also like a rediscovery and a reinvention of something that used to be there, but we kind of lost, and now we're recreating it, but in a modern setting, right? And I see a lot of that going on, fortunately. So,
Did you see the film The Joker?
No, I haven't seen it.
You haven't seen it yet. It's worth seeing because in some levels, for me, I was watching this movie, and it's the overgrown man who's stays with his mother and doesn't, and then the pathology of that. There's a lot of realism to it. I guess I mentioned it just because I was writing about it recently, and thinking about how the postmodern sort of, this postmodern leveling of difference, the leveling of distinctions and qualities of everything, and then what's left is a kind of a parody of of society. And this film was interesting because it had a kind of realism to it. It kind of killed this whole superhero myth of good and evil. It kind of was destroying this kind of pseudo mysticism of the superhero myth, where you're always going to be saved by this and that person, and then you saw this person who was actually real, and how that relates to what we're talking about. And well, I think there's a kind of a caricature of masculinity that has to be kind of like
no, that's true.
Caricature of all the roles in fact, and art, and which because of Hollywood, what, and all of this whole entertainment industry, and so we have this caricature view of what is a man and what is a woman and what is a person and what is a whereas it's actually something all these things we need to find out the deeper and complex nature.
So that's very true. I think on the one hand, it's true that there's some tendencies for an attempt to level the differences or neglect or annihilate the differences between men and women, but there's also attempts to annihilate, and that's maybe even more problematic, the differences between boys and men. And I think we need to have a
and the Joker is that person who never grows up, who never goes through that particular stage, so he remains always in a kind of infantile state. And I think this is kind of a plague, especially in is that the right word, plague? Or it's very widespread is this man boy who never takes responsibility. He has all the freedoms in the world, right? He has all the technology in the world. He has all the gizmos and toys in the world, but he never quite grows up and like in the Jordan Petersonian sense takes responsibility, right? But he remains this kind of clown or caricature of himself.
And I think that there's a tendency for us to, or in a culture, to speak badly about men and being a man. So we, it's always like, or it's not always, but it's often sort of associated with something suspicious or ridiculous or something else, being a man. And what that does is that when we talk about being a man in those terms, what we're telling boys is that don't aspire to become a man. Don't aspire to become a man because it's just ridiculous, or it's dangerous, or it's suspicious, or whatever it is.
It's toxic.
Exactly. Yeah. And we're doing everyone, the boys, the women, everyone, we're doing everyone a disservice by doing that. Nothing good comes of that. There's now you mentioned Jordan Peterson, so there's one phrase or one towards the end of his book, 12 Rules, where he says, if you're afraid of strong men, you haven't seen what weak men can do, something along those lines.
Yeah. Weak men become this joker, become this terrorist, become this, incel, become whatever, all these sort of like things. This is what happens when men, don't cultivate some kind of strength.
Yeah. And I think, what also gets, when we talk about, that's also, I don't like this word gender. I want to talk about men and women. So when we talk about these issues, like for instance, I was just involved recently in a debate about equality here in Denmark.
Yeah.
When we talk about equality and how many women are there in the boardrooms and what is the gender wage gap and all these things, we get it. We talk as if it's a zero-sum game. We talk, there's a finite amount of goods, and then they are distributed between these two classes of people, men and women. And the more the men get, the less the women get. So the more we can take from the men, the more the women will get. Yeah. That's an absurd way of thinking.
Yeah.
And what I've experienced through my men's work and through EMG and all, is the more man, the stronger I become in my manhood, the better for my wife.
Yeah. Well, it's complementarity rather than opposition, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So strong men, good men, it just benefits everyone, including not the women and the children, of course, also. So there's all these kinds of good things about men and strong men. So we should, do what we can to encourage that.
Okay. So you told me you were writing a book about something to do with Heidegger and Peterson. Comparing the two, or talking about Heidegger and men.
So what happened was I started writing a book about Jordan Peterson. And then when I was 40 pages into it, I was like, what is this book actually about? I mean, he's written his own book and he's still alive and he can speak for himself. Does he really need me to say something about him? And then also I kind of came to the realization that what interested me, I'm not really interested in Jordan B. Peterson himself. I'm interested in men.
Yeah.
Men and women, but particularly men. So I kind of skipped that manuscript and then started a new one where I wanted to raise this question: what does it mean to be a man? And then my plan was to sort of include different thinkers in that. I actually came across some of your writings before we met, and I discovered that you had like this, you also like Zizek and you also like Jordan Peterson. And I also like Zizek, I still like him, but several of my books I've used his work and I've been very inspired by that. So I also tried using some Zizek on this, but it didn't really work. And then, so I went my default position, whenever I don't know what to do, I go back to Heidegger and see, okay, what would he think or what would he say? And then I started, just building on Simon Side and his ideas. And I haven't really moved further than that. So now it's become like this book about being a man using Heidegger. So it's a lot of man and Heidegger, and that's kind of it. But I'm in the middle of it now, so I'm not really...
So that probably means you will be attacked at some point for being a Nazi.
I think that's happening already.
It's already happening, is it? Yeah.
There's I was involved in it. I was on television a couple of weeks ago on this issue of equality, and I know this. I mean, some people so Heidegger, he has this phrase. He says, being has the nature of Jemeinigkeit, mindness. So it means that being is always, it's always mine, or I can't talk of being sort of in an abstract way because it's mine. It's kind of part of who I am. And I think that also applies to being a man or being a woman. Is something very, very, very intimate.
Right. And that's interesting. It seems like you're resisting definitions here. You're talking about something that's very important, but you're resisting some kind of ultimate definition of that thing.
Yeah.
Which is, I think that's what I think that's what I learned from Heidegger is that thinking is not just being stuck in one conceptual world. It's sort of revealing and unraveling the meanings of that thing, and it's kind of an infinite process with no end. So, does that make sense?
That's very true. And now I'm thinking, oh no, my book, maybe it's never going to end. How can I finish thing.
No, but that's the right. That's your book shouldn't have an ending. It shouldn't be like it shouldn't be an absolute statement. It should be a provoking of more truth, right?
Yeah, no, I hope that. And I mean, you before you ask me sort of why did this question of being a man, why has that become relevant to me? And I told a story about my son and divorce and all this. But I think there's another thing is that I studied sociology in the 90s, and I then later discovered that none of what I read in sociology about men and women was of any use to me in terms of figuring out my own life. More the opposite. It was just confusing or misleading me. And I actually think that there's actually very few resources in philosophy in terms of thinking about what it means to be a man.
Have you read Ivan Illich's book? Do you know Ivan Illich?
Who?
Ivan Illich.
Ivan Illich?
Yeah. He wrote a book. He actually wrote a book called Gender, and then this was hijacked. This term was hijacked. Probably it was him who brought it into vogue. But it's the most interesting book I've ever read on men and women and complementarity and all that. Maybe you should check that book out.
It's from the 80s, isn't it?
I think it was published in 1980. Yeah.
Yeah. I think my friend, he talks about this sometimes, but I haven't gotten around to. And I'm sitting here, there's nothing in philosophy, there's nothing in sociology, and then there's all these books that I haven't read, so maybe I should be a little bit more careful. But at least, I mean, it was part of the curriculum that I was introduced to. It just didn't help me. I mean, and I think that's still too large. I think that's one of the reasons why Jordan Peterson has become so popular. Yeah. Because here's actually the beginnings or the sketch or the introduction to a conversation about what it means to be a man, which does not start from the premise that, men are bad and they're just out to exploit women and all this kind of stuff. But it really starts from a positive starting point, saying men are generous, they want to help women and be honest and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. And that's right. I think it's an introduction. I think you're right. And also I think that he's kind of the only person out there who is valorizes that and in a relentless sort of way and keeps going, valorizes the value of men and keeps talking about it. And
I think even
for more like intellectual people, that seems quaint or something to them, but and so they miss the importance of that. I often wonder if it comes from a sort of working class, background and really understanding, the kind of toughness of primal life and I don't know if that makes.
No, that makes sense. There was something I noticed in the Kathy Newman interview. And it was right at the beginning. So she asks him something along the lines of, most of your audience is male.
Yeah.
Most of them are men. And then he kind of deflects that, or he then answers, well, yeah, but it's just because it's YouTube and Tumblr is for girls, something like that. And then there's this sense that he wants to kind of avoid, or he kind of deflects that question there. But then I've seen in later interviews, it's like he kind of discovers, okay, why is it that that's even a bad thing that so many men or boys or young men.
Why should he be apologizing for that in any way? I mean, there's no reason to apologize for that.
I remember seeing later interviews with him where he kind of just takes it more as a positive quality, saying, well, that's because it appeals to them. Because
then young men are important and they have all this virility and they, they help build the world and we have to,
and there's plenty of people speaking for, if you're a woman, and you want to know about what it means. I mean, there's so much more stuff on that, and it doesn't start from. Then we can debate whether that's good or I don't know that because I'm not a woman. Perhaps it makes sense for the women, whatever's out there already, feminism and what have you, gender theory. Maybe it makes sense for them, and if it does, that's all well and good. Go ahead.
Yeah.
But I can just, for myself as a man, it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't
Yeah.
make me.
Well, I was thinking about this, and I don't want to be anti-feminist at all. I want to be pro-feminist, but I also want to be masculinist. Like I think the picture has to be balanced. I think we can criticize feminism in a lot of ways, and then there's some feminists who are more interesting than others, and we don't want to go there particularly. But if there's feminism, there has to be masculinism as well. I mean,
I think but what if it's like this? And I'm just throwing that out there. What if it's like this for women, or for some women? It makes sense to make sense of themselves from the perspective of feminism, which is like taking one side. Mm-hmm. Maybe that makes sense to them. But what if it's like this, that for men, that just doesn't make sense? It's not part of our, part of being a man is protecting, or part of being a man is putting women and children before yourself. Mm-hmm. What if that's part of being a man? Then even masculinism wouldn't even make sense. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's true, but I do know that for me, if it makes sense to some people, fine, go ahead, do it.
Well, I guess what I mean by masculinism is just revalorizing masculinity and maleness, and just as feminism, at least in intention is trying to value the woman is a value, right? And so we're saying the woman is a value and the men is also a value. We don't even have to have isms, but
I'm not even, I know but there's also something in that. I mean, I don't think it's for me to, and I know that's not what you're saying, but one could kind of think, oh, now we've had feminism that has kind of overvalued, or I don't think it can be overvalued, but at least sort of put the feminist or the feminist sort of on the pedestal or whatever they've done. So now we need something to counterbalance that. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that's ever going to balance out. I think we need to find another.
Well, maybe that's still rivalrous in a sense. It is
in a sense, and again, it doesn't. There's a reason why there's feminism and not masculinism. It is because the whole idea of valorizing the masculine over the feminine is just not a very masculine thing to do. It's one of the things the first European men's, also the second one, but one of the things that struck me at the first European men's gathering was we were 140 men. We were together for a whole weekend. Not one single time did I hear anyone say anything negative about women. Not once.
Right.
And I was just so happy about that.
That's very interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I could see that in my parents, actually, I've never heard my father speak ill of my mother, right? After their divorce. He just didn't. In fact, he would be more likely say sort of positive things about her. And I never heard as a young person, I heard negative things about my father relentlessly, right? And I think a lot of boys do hear negative things about their father. The father's and it's not saying my father was any kind of model or example or my mother either, but that seemed to be just normal, right? It seemed to be normal that one should speak very badly about the guy who had failed and was a loser but he would not do the same thing for a woman. And why wouldn't he speak about maybe out of fear? I don't know. Maybe.
No. I have a very no. The reason why he doesn't speak bad about your mother is because he's a man, period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also another thing is, no one wants to listen to a man who speaks badly about women.
Mm-hmm.
Women certainly don't want to hear about it, but even more, other men, we don't like to hear it, or we just because
and that is like the worst kind of man, isn't it? The guy who's just complaining about women all the time, or
it is. Yeah, there's something very unmasculine about it, and there's also something. I think it's also another thing is that we also men we also don't want to identify as victims. And there's something like when you talk bad about women and stuff, you're also putting yourself in the position of being a victim. And that's also not a very masculine thing to do.
Yeah.
I think I have to be careful, but just looking empirically on what happens under the headline of feminism, there is a lot of taking the position of the victim. And there is a lot of talking badly about men. I just have to, that's just what I say.
But that's what even Ellis says in his book. It's like the power of women's gossip is actually, there's a sacred quality to that. And just talking about other people, and that's how you decide who's worthy and not worthy in the community.
And I'm sure that there's some sort of, and that has some sort of a function. I'm sure that there's a purpose for that. I'm sure there's a purpose for that, and there's good things about that.
You're not just complaining about women here. That's not what you're.
No, I'm sure that it has a function. I'm not sure that function is always being performed in the best way, but I think there's a primordial function in that. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there. I'm that much of a functionalist sociologist I am. So therefore, I also don't have a problem with women. Or women getting together and talking bad about their men, or I have absolutely no problem with that. They can do that all day long if they want to. However, I don't want to be. If I'm around men and if they start talking bad about women, it just there's no energy in it. I don't like it. And I think that's
very, very interesting. Yeah.
To a large extent to our culture.
Yeah.
And it's on the one, it's kind of like the Achilles. I don't know the Achilles heel, but it is also the problem of I was going to say the men's movement, but there isn't really a men's movement because it's easy to have it's easier to have a movement if you can sort of identify around some sort of victimhood. Oh, we're all victims. Let's form a movement. Yeah, let's do that. Blah blah blah. And then you can form a movement. But it's very, very difficult to mobilize men around that because men, we don't like to mobilize around victimhood. But at the same time, obviously there are problems in society in relations between men and women, like for instance, like divorce, legal arrangement around divorce and stuff, where there's huge problems that have to be solved. It's so difficult to mobilize men around these issues because, what is it actually you're identifying with then? So so
you don't think there could be a credible men's movement in the same way there was a women's movement, in the 70s?
It's not a question of credibility. It's not a question.
It's a question of what, marketing or
it's
being a big.
It's a question of getting enough men together to have a powerful movement. I think. I don't know if that's to some extent. I think there will only, in order to solve the problems around the legal system around divorces. I'm talking about this because for me that's the main problem the main sort of political problem for men today has to do with it. It's terrible, and it's terrible everywhere, especially terrible in Denmark. And I've been involved in this work, so I also know something about it. And I've seen, the work on this has been going on for at least 20 years. And I will say very little, if any, progress has been made in those 20 years. I think those, it's only when women start getting engaged in these questions that something will happen. So we need women to say, this is not good. We want our boys and our girls.
Yeah. You need women to stick up for their men.
Yeah. Just like men have. I mean, why do women have the right to vote?
Yeah.
Because men stood up for them and said, of course women should vote. Like, I'm not saying the women didn't also do something, but there was plenty of men involved in that. Plenty.
Yeah. So there's a lot of goodwill of men towards women, and the other thing is also true. I mean,
there is of course there's a lot of, but I do think, or I wish there would be more women who would sort of go into this and say, we can't have.
Well, maybe there are more women. They're just a silent majority of some kind.
Like, I think they are. Yeah,
I think there are a lot of women that sort of would listen to this and agree, but then might be afraid to speak about it, in a more public forum.
If women could mobilize just 10% of the passion and 10% of the engagement that they've invested in the Me Too movement, if they could invest that in getting proper divorce regulations, that would make a world of a difference. Yeah. Do you want to talk about Zizek?
Oh, sure. Well, I'm not an expert at Zizek. I just read like 3 of his books for fun. I never wrote about him or thought about him that much, as much as Jordan Peterson. But he's an interesting person to contemplate.
Yeah. I really enjoyed I found the interaction between, or the meeting or whatever, the conversation between Zizek and Jordan Peterson. I really found that interesting.
Yeah.
And I think
interesting because they have such different approaches and ways of thinking. Peterson was sort of coming in there with his all of his like fierce, energy, and Zizek was kind of deflecting all that, or something.
Yeah. But I also, what the most, I was really happy about it, not so much because of whatever insights came out of it, but more because they actually listened to each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
They actually listened to each other. And so what I found was that it was really it was a civilized intellectual conversation.
Yeah.
And there was no hysteria. There was no, and I really liked that. I think a lot of people were, especially perhaps on the Zizek side, were disappointed with this because they kind of wanted this dogfight or something, and they didn't get it. They just got too.
Yeah, that was what's interesting. Was it was sort of built up to be this this battle of some kind, and then the battle never happened, and it just ended up 2 people talking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I will say that for me, that's one of another one, and perhaps an even greater contribution of Jordan Peterson is that I see what he's brought to the table, what he's brought into the intellectual environment is it's like as if he's kind of rediscovered, or through him we're rediscovering the intellectual conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where I a lot of what I've experienced, not among my colleagues, but sort of in, I think at the university, there's too little. We tend to we talk to people that we agree with, and then the ones we don't agree with are the ones that are from a different paradigm. We sort of make up a straw man of them, and then we discuss with that among ourselves, and they do the same thing.
Yeah.
But I think with
well, I guess that's what's powerful about both Zizek and Peterson is they've brought these ideas down from the ivory tower in some sense, and especially Peterson.
Yeah.
made it sort of made people intellectually curious in ways that they weren't before, and people who are not necessarily intellectuals, you know, by nature.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah, I mean, yeah, and that's what's coming out. That you can just have. I mean, if you just have people talking and listening to each other, then there's also an audience for that, because people are just like people are hungry for men's work. They're also hungry for that. They're just hungry for.
They're hungry for uncensored conversation in a way that's but it's also civilized. It's a nice balance between, you know, where you should theoretically be able to say anything, you know, in a free society and talk about anything, and you know.
Yeah.
But there is this intense sort of, I think in the millennial generation, especially the younger people, there's this intense kind of this political correctness or fear of being, you know, it's almost like you have to find a scapegoat somewhere and attack it, and then that distracts from the entire possibility of you know, a conversation where you're learning and growing together.
I guess my students would be the millennial generation. And what I've experienced with my students, and I agree with you, yes, there is what you're talking about, there is that in our culture, in our time, but I also sense that there's a lot of the opposite.
Yeah, me too.
I experienced so many students of sort of the generation that I'm teaching now. They're so fed up with that, and they're so hungry for these big questions and these big discussions about these potentially controversial issues, and they're all for freedom of speech and freedom of thinking. And I just as recently as yesterday, I was giving a lecture on Jordan Peterson, organized by some students at the theology department at the Copenhagen University, and they just formed a student association called Fri Tanke, which means free thought or free thinking or something like that.
Was this controversial in other areas of the university, or is that just over this like business of
not really.
Business of Jordan Peterson being controversial and all that, or is that kind of finished?
It was like a year ago.
A year ago, yeah.
Well, a year ago, I did a couple of lectures and public lecture, and there was a little bit of controversy about that. But I sense these things are moving. Like, so for me, I can sense there's a difference just from a year ago and today. So a year ago, Jordan Peterson, I had like colleagues coming, what is this? And are you not afraid or something like that?
Yeah.
Whereas today it's like, wow, Jordan Peterson, interesting, blah, blah, blah. So I think things are really
he's ceased to be. I just read a book by René Girard, and René Girard talks a lot about the scapegoat, and he's ceased to be the scapegoat in such an intense way that he was a year and a half ago. He's kind of disappeared as a person who fulfills that role, and he's just sort of ordinary now. He's just like part of the landscape. Yeah.
And I also, another thing that I've experienced, or I think has happened, is that some of these attacks on ideas similar to Jordan Peterson, or just making these accusations like, oh, you're racist, or you should be banned, or something like that. They used to be for free. They used to be without risk. You could just make these accusations, and then maybe you got away with it, or maybe nothing happened. You can just throw out accusations. That's not how it is anymore. There's risk now involved in that. You can make these accusations.
There's a faster feedback loop, right? You can't just maybe.
No, I think there's
the mirrors. There's a stronger mirror for how you behave, or something like that. Is that what you're saying?
Or I think there's a stronger. I think what used to be like the silent majority who would agree with some of these ideas. Yes, there's differences between men and women or something, but they wouldn't voice them because, or they would be in favor of free speech or something like that, but they wouldn't voice it. but now they've seen so many other people voicing it, so they're like, yeah, I can also say so. So I think I was going to use the word power balance, but I'm not sure that's the right word here, because I don't think it's a matter of power.
Well, maybe it's this whole middle ground area opening up where,
Yeah, that's what I'm finding. That's what I'm finding. And also, I mean, that's also what part of what Jordan Peterson has done is he's sort of invited or a lot of non-academics into the academic debate, or into debates which used to be exclusively for academics. So you have a lot of like ordinary people or people who don't have anything at stake in the academic world who are now engaging in these debates, which just means you can't get away with some of the absurdities that you could get away with 10 years ago or something like.
Right.
Now you're called out on them. So
is this the academic world, the institutions falling apart, or is that exaggerated? Peter, that's one of the things Peterson talks about. He talks about how the universities are sort of collapsing, and as institutions.
I think it can go both ways. I think it depends on how the institutions, how they navigate this. I think there's also opportunities here for universities if they play it right. So I don't think they necessarily have to collapse, but there's certainly some systems, or there's certainly some parts of the academic system or which will collapse or are collapsing already. I don't know. What do you think? I want to hear your opinion on this.
Oh, well, I think it's definitely a collapse and restructuring time.
What do you mean by?
Because I teach at French universities, and I'm not a permanent staff member. I'm very much an outsider, so I don't get the ins and outs of things. But I do get direct contact with the students a lot, and I definitely have a feeling that the students have changed in the past few years. That they're getting smarter, and they're getting better at teaching themselves things, and so. An old school teacher who has nothing relevant to say is becoming more redundant, right? So you have to pick up the pace a bit and be more relevant and say things that be more meaningful, be more relevant, and be on top of what's going on. And of course, you have to be like a bit with it with the technology, or you're going to lose them pretty fast. So and also there's this 5 years ago, 10 years ago, there was no computers in the classroom. It's just, there's like a third element there. There's it's the teacher student machine now. And it's a whole new dynamic. When they want to daydream, they can just go into their computer and daydream, which is fine. I guess if the teacher's boring, maybe it's better. I mean, maybe they're learning more on their own.
In my class, I don't allow any screens in my class.
Yeah.
But anyway, I get what you see, and I think my own. I don't know. I'm gonna toot my own horn, or at least So I work at a business school, right?
Yeah. Right.
So I think some of the things like one of the benefits of a business school is that we can't afford we have to be more.
Less bullshit, so to speak.
Yeah, or more in tune. Like this element of how does this relate to the world outside? How does this relate to the jobs that people are actually going to perform? That's more an integrated part of our discipline or what we're doing there. So in that sense, I think we're better tuned. We're more, in some sense, I think we're more flexible. We respond quicker to things that are going on outside of the university, and I think that's a good thing.
I teach at engineer schools and business schools, so I see the difference. And engineer. Well, it kind of it's a segue to our discussion with guys. Engineers are 90% guys, obviously, and so they have a certain quality. They're usually very bright, and they're less. The business people are more social. They're more, extroverted and social and more on the ball in that way. But the engineer guys are introverted and weird creative, and they like to go into different worlds, and so that's kind of interesting. I'm glad I'm teaching at those kind of schools also, even though my background is in the humanities and literature, because I think these kind of schools are, the Grande École in Paris, they're more pragmatic minded people.
Yeah.
So there's less theoretical flakiness.
Yeah. No, that's probably true. Yeah. I also really, I've been at the business school now for 10 years, and I really enjoy this mix of, or even also the students. I mean, they come there they're hungry for knowledge, and they're curious, and they've got all of that, but they're also like, okay, we want to do something in the world. We want to get a job. We want to be relevant and stuff like that. So in that sense, and they also, I sense that at least in our program, I teach in a program where we combine philosophy and business administration, or philosophy and economics. So, and I sense that they are quite sort of ideologically diverse.
Yeah.
So you can't just, you can't get away with just say, capitalism is bad, blah, blah. You can't go that way. But you can't also say, Marcus will fix everything. Like you will, regardless of what you say, you can risk being sort of challenged from either side. And I really enjoy that. I really love my students. I really, really love them. So, I'm so optimistic at the moment. I'm really, even though, some of the stuff we're talking about is like, there's huge problems, but I really sense that, I have this sense that things are a lot of things that they're moving in the right direction.
That's great. Okay, maybe I can ask you like one more sort of pertinent question, and that is, when we were speaking on the last night of this men's group in Denmark, you talked about you wanted to do something about starting men's groups in companies, and we had this whole discussion on the pragmatics of that, and whether how that would work, and that kind of thing. So, and then I wrote this paper, which kind of not paper, excuse me, a blog post, which kind of was a riff on that idea, that it would be good to have men's groups, in institutions, and it would be good to which got some mixed reactions. People thought, oh yeah, you want to go back, and we've made so much progress. And I say, no, it's not. I was thinking, no, that's not quite right. I'm not saying I want to go back to something. It's more like I want to rediscover something for the future. Or so anyway, I like that idea, and I'm interested in how you're trying to put it into practice.
So
where you're at with that.
Yeah, so I started this small company with two associates. One is Paul, who's organizing European Men's Gathering, and the other one is Torben, who's also at the European Men's Gathering. And the idea, so as I said also in the beginning, I have this sense that being a man is such an asset. There's so much energy in that that you can tap into. But I also, and that's, of course, that's what we're doing at the European Men's Gathering. But I also sense that for many men, going to the European Men's Gathering, it's like it's a big step for them. Like most of the men who are there, they've already done some kind of other self-development work or something like that. So going to an event like that, it's for everyone, of course, and there's a lot of different kinds of men, but there are also men who are already sort of, used to thinking about themselves and stuff. So what we wanted to do was to say, how can we make it easier for more men to get reap some of the benefits of this work, to get to do men's work. So what we're trying to do is to present this in a form where it's accessible to the corporate world, so that through your work you can enter into men's work, and of course, that you have to do it in a special way, and but but it is, I mean, what you get out of, what you can get out, or what you do get out of men's work is actually leadership. I mean, you get this ability to speak from your heart, or to mobilize not just your head, but the rest of your body in decision making and in your judgments and stuff. That's what we train in men's work. And I think that's beneficial in all relations. It's beneficial in your family life and your kids and your wife, but it's also very beneficial in your work life. I mean, if you work with other people, it's to be able to speak from your heart and say honestly to someone, look, when you say that, I feel like this, or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of benefits in this, which could also be valuable in the corporate world. So that's what we're trying. It's called Athos. The company is called Athos. Mm-hmm. And we're still in the process of figuring out how, on the one hand, there's a certain quality to just working with men and having men work with men. But of course, in the corporate world, there's men and women.
Yeah.
And with absolutely no ambition of excluding women from the corporate world, not at all. So we also, I mean, I think there should also be women's work in corporation. Yeah. So, mm-hmm. But I think now we're just starting with this men's work and seeing what we can do with that. So basically, what we want to do is take some of the techniques and methods that we use in the European Men's Gathering, and then introduce that to corporations or other workplaces.
Mm-hmm. Sounds great. Yeah, Alexander was mentioning this need for like desexualized spaces.
Yeah.
What do you think of that as a concept?
It depends on what he means with desexualized spaces. If he means spaces where there's no...
Well, I mean, the office is such a place of flirtation, right? And
yeah, okay, I see that. Yeah, so yeah, okay, now I see where he's getting. So I think the idea here is, or maybe what he's, as I understand what you're saying, is that what happens if you take a group of men and get them together in a room with no women.
Yeah.
What you do is you take sex out of the equation.
Yeah.
And when you do that, other opportunities arise. So that's also what we experience at the European Men's Gathering. In some ways, it's like it's more of a safe space.
Yeah.
And one of the paradoxes that I find in men's work, well, it's not a paradox, but is that when you bring men together, only men, what comes out is, on the one hand, their masculinity comes out in a more pure or more, but also
their femininity,
but also their feminine side.
Or in other words, their ability to care for each other. And that, I mean, I guess if you have people in the military, or if you have people in a monastery, if they're isolated from the women, they have to develop that aspect of themselves, right, in order to survive, right?
Yeah, and I think another thing is that if you're, just because that's how men are, I mean, if there's a woman, if you have a group of 9 men and there's one woman there, and regardless of what kind of a woman she is, there's something in you where you kind of think, I need to take care of this woman. So when I say something, I can't just speak directly from my heart. I have to think, how will this woman react or think about what I'm now saying?
Yeah.
And once you get into that, you're kind of like, and then your words kind of, you can't really, whereas if it's just men,
there's a directness there.
Yeah, there's something about, and another thing is also,
and you don't go into a seduction mode of trying to,
competing. That's another thing.
You don't start competing for the women, and you're just
no. It's not like
you're able. Actually, that's the funny thing, because men together are considered to be this, the rivalrous, like competing and macho kind of thing. But almost when men get together, the rivalry kind of falls away. There's just this direct. Being together.
So more men in the world should experience that. The more men who experience that, the better the world.
And the more happy they'll be. I mean, because there's so many miserable, unhappy men who are all alone in front of their computers, and the more they build community with other men, You know, I have a colleague, and she has 3 sons, and they play rugby together, and they're so happy, these guys. Like, you can tell because they have a tribe, right? You know, and you know, a lot of, you know, I think about like a lot of these miserable guys who are all kind of all alone and kind of like in front of their computers. It's like, you know, you need male friendships, you need male, you know, encouragement and all that. No,
no, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.